What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Today is August 9th, 2020. And if you're listening or watching, you are listening or watching to the Marston Brothers podcast. What's going on, my MBP crew? We got lots of information that we want to share today. We're going to cover the president's executive orders that were just passed on August 8th. And I wanted to use this as an opportunity to break down some of these executive orders. We'll see how these go based off of the amount of time that we have. We'll start off with maybe one or two, and then based off of how everybody's feeling, maybe we do all four this episode, or maybe we decide to do the rest of them on another episode. So we'll see how things go. But before that, I want to see how everybody's doing today. So, my brothers are busy, so they're not going to be able to be on this episode. But, so far life is good in this Marcelin Brothers household. My wife is doing great. She is kicking butt and taking names on maternity leave. Little of Amelia is starting to become getting bigger. Amelia, she's just growing just before our eyes, and it's just a awesome sight to see it. She's just in the phase of her life where she's soaking in everything. You can start seeing her with some of the facial expressions, and she starts to squeeze out a smile every once in a while too. So that's something that's pretty awesome. And Ophelia is becoming the big sister that is the best big sister. She, every day you can see just the way that she treats Amelia. It's great. And Ophelia is becoming smarter and smarter every day. She's having these conversations, like we're having real conversations with each other, y'all. So it's one of those things where she's coming of age and she is just maturing so much. So I can appreciate when people say, hey, try to take these days one day at a time, because before you know it, they'll be grown, they'll be big, and they'll be out of the house. And Ophelia's going to be turning 3 in a couple of weeks, and I can't believe she's already 3, and I can't believe that Amelia is over a month and a half, almost 2 months. So time is definitely flying. Work is work. We got to do whatever we got to do to take care of people. So that's going pretty well. And really, I'm just blessed. I've got no worries, no issues compared to everything that's going on in this world and the stories that you hear about every day, the things that I see at work. I've got no complaints at all, and I am living a blessed life. So I've got nothing to worry about at all. So that's how life is going with me. So with that being said, let's break down the news straight off the press. So the president, was discussing doing some executive orders because he felt that Congress couldn't put together a plan to help the people. Looks like both sides of the aisles were going back and forth. So President Trump decided to do 4 executive orders, and I wanted to discuss some of these executive orders. So one of them is going to be dealing with, what are we doing with the $600 that, has stopped from the CARES Act with unemployment. So one of them is going to deal with that. One of them is dealing with what are we going to do with student loan repayment relief during the pandemic. One of them is what do we do with no evictions. And then the other one is going to be looking at can we do anything with some sort of payroll tax. So 4 things to discuss. We'll start reading a couple of them. We'll actually go into the actual executive orders. And, before we actually go into detail, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to let my MVP crew know that whenever these presidential news, whenever there are executive orders or information that the president is dictating, you can actually see a lot of this stuff word for word if you go to www.whitehouse.gov. A lot of times, whether we're listening on the news or we're reading news journal articles, a lot of those articles that we're reading, for the most part, they are summarizing this information. And I think, and it's good to go straight to the source to see what is actually being said, because sometimes somebody may say that somebody is saying something, whether it's the president says something or news is saying something, but when you actually read what was done, it doesn't necessarily line up, or somebody can mislead you one way to another. So I always like going straight to the source. So this is one thing that I'm going to start using a lot more, and I think we'll probably discuss some of these presidential actions more often, since we have the source and we can dissect them and we can see how things are going, because a lot of this information is going to be affecting our everyday lives. So with that being said, I think the first one that we're going to go over is what are we doing with the whole student loan repayment program? I think that, a lot of the MBP crew, I think a lot of people probably are dealing with this, specifically student loan repayment for federal loans. So long story short, what ended up happening before this new presidential memorandum. So we had the CARES Act. CARES Act essentially, stopped, um, allowed for a deferment of federal student loans, and it also allowed for 0% interest to be accrued during that time. The big question is, how long is this going to last? The initial CARES Act stated that it would end on September 30th of 2020. And a lot of people are trying to figure out, what are we going to do from there? Are we going to be going back to having to pay the federal loans? Is this going to be one of those loans where we're eventually going to not have any loans, period? So we're going to read straight up from the whitehouse.gov memorandum. We'll read it, we'll dissect it, and we'll see where things go from there. So, Memorandum on Continued Student Loan Payment Relief During the COVID-19 Pandemic. This was issued on August 8, 2020. So it states, Memorandum for the Secretary of Education subjects continued student loan payment relief during COVID-19 pandemic. By the authority vested in me by the President of the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered as follows. You look at what the actual policy is. So Section 1 policy. The 2019 novel coronavirus known as SARS-CoV-2, the virus causing the outbreaks of the disease COVID-19, has significantly disrupted the lives of Americans. In Proclamation 9994 of March 13, 2020, declaring a national emergency concerning the novel coronavirus disease outbreak, I, as in the President, declared pursuant to the National Emergencies Act that the COVID-19 outbreak in the United States constituted a national emergency. That day, I also determined that the COVID-19 outbreak constituted an emergency of nationwide scope pursuant to the Stafford Act. On March 20th, 2020, my administration took action to provide immediate relief to tens of millions of student loan borrowers during the pandemic caused by COVID-19 by both suspending loan payments and temporarily setting interest rates to 0%. This relief has helped many students and parents retain financial stability. And many other Americans have continued to routinely pay down their student loan balances to more quickly eliminate their loans in the long run. During this time, borrowers have been able to determine the best path forward for themselves. The original announcement of this policy specified that it would continue for at least 60 days. In the interim, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act provided this same student loan payment relief, but the program is scheduled to expire on September 30th, 2020. Currently, many Americans remain unemployed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and many more have accepted lower wages and reduced hours while states and localities continue to impose social distancing measures. It is therefore appropriate to extend this policy until such time that the economy has stabilized, schools have reopened, and crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic has subsided. So right now, this is just setting up what the initial policy is, what the background is. So essentially, there's something that's going to be done, and right now it's leaving it open as to saying we want to extend the policy until we feel like things have stabilized. So one thing that we're all going to be asking is, well, what does that mean? Who determines that? What is the time frame? So once we go into section 2, we're going to see exactly what that's discussing. So again, just summarizing section 1, COVID's coming through. Because of COVID, it's considered a national emergency and disaster. People aren't working. Thought process is, well, if people aren't working, we've gone through a national disaster. We need to be able to do something to help provide some relief to individuals who have student loans. So that's where you have the whole suspension of loan payments. Now, especially, make sure that we understand what we're talking about here. So this is going to be the federal loans, not just all student loans, federal student loans, and temporarily setting interest rates to 0% for those specific loans. We are going through that. It was supposed to expire on September 30th, which is going to be next month. And now, because we are still going through this pandemic. Government wants to, or the president wants to do something else. So if we check out Section 2, Extension of Student Loan Payment Relief. In light of the national emergency declared on March 13, 2020, the Secretary of Education shall take action pursuant to applicable law to effectuate appropriate waivers of and modifications to the requirements and conditions of economic hardship deferments described in the Higher Education Act of 1965, and provide such deferments to borrowers as necessary to continue the temporary cessation of payments and the waiver of all interest on student loans held by the Department of Education until December 31st, 2020. Section B says, all persons who wish to continue making student loan payments shall be allowed to do so, notwithstanding the deferments provided pursuant to subsection A of this section. So, it looks like the president's outlining he wants to do an additional extension of the student loan repayment relief program. And what it sounds like is everything that has gone on before from the CARES Act, we are going to be continuing that. And the key word here is to continue the temporary cessation of payments and the waiver of all interest on student loans held by the Department of Education until December 31st, 2020. So Department of Education, what loans do they hold? They hold the federal loans. So any of those federal student loans are going to be, the interest is going to be finished, or there's going to be a waiver on that. And there's also going to be a temporary cessation of the payments as well. So the payments and the interest are still going to be stopped until December 31st, 2020. And then again, if you want to make a dent in your loans, you are able to do so. You won't be penalized to do that, but that's going to be based off to the individual. All right, we'll talk more about that, but let's go on to Section 3. So Section 3 is going to be the general provisions. Nothing in this memorandum shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect, 1, the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency, or the head thereof. 2, functions of the Director of Office of Management and Budgeting related to the budgetary, administrative, or legislative proposals. You're looking at letter C. The memorandum is not intended to, nor does it create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law, or inequality any part of the United States, its departments, agencies, and entities or its officials, employees, agents, or any other person. And D, you are authorized and directed to publish this memorandum in the Federal Register. So long story short, what this general provision, it's kind of like a waiver saying, for the most part, this shouldn't impair anything else that's going on for any of the other governing bodies, and we've got to still make sure that we're following the law. So that is specifically the quote unquote student loan repayment relief. And summarizing this is the president essentially is just going to be extending what he was doing before. I think out of the 4 items that was discussed, this is probably the most clean cut. This is probably the most simple thing to do. I don't think anybody is going to have any type of serious argument on continuing this because of everything that's been going on. And I think what is important is for individuals, one, who have federal student loans, that if they are trying to either use the Federal Loan Forgiveness Program for Public Service Loan Forgiveness, the PSFL, if you are going through that tract, any month that goes by when the canceling or the deferment of student loans have to be paid, those months actually count towards the amount of necessary payments that are needed in order for your loans to be forgiven. So if you're going through the 120-month program, each month that this is going on, it counts as an additional month. So this is pretty big for some of the individuals who are going through this program, because essentially what we've had is from the month of March till December, $0 have been paid, and you have 9 months worth of credits towards that 120-month payment, which is almost a year. So I think this is something that a lot of my peers who are participating in this program are probably very happy about. And I think this is able to assist individuals who may not have had an opportunity to get some sort of relief based off of income, based off of what they do. So this is something that I feel like a lot of those peers will be very happy with. Again, this does not apply to your private loans. If you're in private loans, then they may look at this and maybe they will do something towards their version, but there's no guarantee that whatever rates or whatever things that are going on in the private loan arena is going to be changed because of what this referendum memorandum has done. Now, a lot of times, especially from what happened initially with the interest on loans decreasing, that affected the private loans a little bit, but that might not necessarily be affected with what's going on here. So that's the first one that I wanted to talk about. The second one that we'll probably take a look at, because it looks like we're 16 minutes in, so maybe we'll discuss another one. Let's talk about this payroll tax thing. So on the news, President Trump has one of his goals has always been taking a look at this payroll tax, and I think based off of what his powers might be, maybe trying to eliminate it altogether. So this is something that has been argued in Congress. I feel like this is something that President Trump's been a big advocate for, but none of the members of Congress are, necessarily excited about it, because these payroll taxes do fund, some of the entitlement programs that we have with Social Security. So I think that's where a lot of disagreement with Congress is going on, is because if you take away this payroll tax, then how are you going to fund Social Security? What are some other things that can help fund that, or any of the other taxes, or any of the other monies that the government needs to be able to run the government? Because you take that away, then it's got to go somewhere else from another bucket. So we're just going to read this, and then we'll discuss this as well. So this official title of this presidential memorandum is, this is a memorandum on deferring payroll tax obligations in light of the ongoing COVID-19 disaster. So first off, just notice that this is not necessarily entitled an executive order. So that's different than the previous one that we talked about, because the previous one was actually an executive order. So this is a presidential memorandum. So, memorandum for the security of the Treasury. The subject is deferring payroll tax obligations in light of the ongoing COVID-19 disaster. By authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, is hereby ordered as follows. That Section 1 says that the 2019 novel coronavirus that originated in the People's Republic of China has caused significant, sudden, and unexpected disruptions to the American economy. On March 13, 2020, I determined that the COVID-19 pandemic is of sufficient severity and magnitude to warrant an emergency declaration under the Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, and that is still the case today. American workers have been particularly hit hard by this ongoing disaster. While the Department of the Treasury has already undertaken historic efforts to alleviate hardships of our citizens, it is clear that the further temporary relief is necessary to support working Americans during these challenging times. To that end, I am directing the Secretary of the Treasury to use his authority to defer certain payroll tax obligations with respect to the American workers most in need. This modest targeted action will put money directed in the pockets of American workers and generate additional incentives for work and employment when the money is needed the most. Section 2. Deferring certain payroll tax obligations. The Secretary of the Treasury is hereby directed to use his authority pursuant to some sort of law to defer the withholding, deposit, and payment of tax imposed, and so much tax imposed is as attributed to the rate in which on wages, compensation, as applicable, paid during the periods of September 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020, subject to the following conditions. A, the deferral shall be made available with respect to any employee, the amount of whose wages or compensation as applicable payable during any biweekly pay period is generally less than $4,000. Calculated on pre-tax basis, or the equivalent amount with respect to other pay periods. B. Amounts deferred pursuant to the implementation of this memorandum shall be deferred without any penalties, interest, additional amount, or addition to the tax. Section 3 says that the Secretary shall issue the guidance to implement this memorandum. Section 4 says the Secretary of Treasury shall explore avenues, including legislation, to eliminate the obligation to pay the deferred taxes pursuant to the implementation of this memorandum. And Section 5 is kind of like that general provision, like we discussed before, is this is not supposed to supersede things, and people need to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. All right, so what does this mean? So when we actually read the specifics, there's a lot of gray areas in this memorandum. So the way that I heard it described to me initially before reading this was that there's going to be, with this payroll tax, that people aren't going to need being paid payroll tax anymore. This is going to be looked at, as a way to be able to boost up the economy because we don't have to pay these taxes anymore. But when I'm reading the specifics in this memorandum, it says here that we're deferring. So that's one key word, is there's a difference between eliminating it altogether and deferring. This is deferring the payroll tax obligation. So I guess the way that I would describe this is when we had to do our federal income taxes. Federal income taxes were done initially, they're usually due April 15th. But there was a deferment of when we needed to go and file our taxes from April 15th to July 15th. Now, this did not change what we owed. This did not change what we needed to pay. The money still needed to be paid, but it was going to be paid at a later date. And the whole purpose of that is that this would give more time for individuals to be able to use the money that they're making to take care of immediate needs based off of things that happen on the coronavirus. But they still have to be paid eventually. So when I'm reading this is saying deferring certain payroll tax obligations. I don't see the specific time in which this will be deferred to. All I read when I'm going through this section is that anything that is paid during the period of September 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. So there's not a specific date that this needs to be paid by. So does this mean that this gets paid in December, in January? Does this mean that this is for this tax year, we don't have to worry about this payroll tax, and then we have to just do double up the next year? So that's one question that I do have, and it'll be interesting to see how Secretary of the Treasury is going to be handling this. Number two, one thing that's important to note as well is that this is not everybody who is going to be able to take care of this. So we are looking at individuals whose compensation during any biweekly pay period is generally less than $4,000. So this already is going to be I think the intent of this is to make sure that we are taking care of the individuals who need it the most. This is going to be the individuals who, are not your high earners, which is good because we do need to make sure that we're taking care of those individuals, because these are the individuals that aren't going to be working. These are the individuals that may have been laid off. These are the individuals that may have had to have a major cut in their salary. So I totally agree with this immensely. So if we just look at the calculations real quick, if we're looking at less than $4,000 in any biweekly pay period, so you can essentially do 4,000, you can multiply that by 26, and when you take a look at that, now again, this is before taxes, so it just depends on where you're going to fall. So we're looking at individuals, a majority of the citizens of our United States of America, which is very, very important. This is looking at people who make $104,000 or less. So I think this is the goal of the president, is to make sure that our middle class is being taken care of, and this is one of the ways that he's trying to help out. So again, the question is going to be, again, how far and how long is this going to be done, and when is it going to be done? And then what I thought was also interesting is if you look at Section 4, it says tax forgiveness. The Secretary of the Treasury shall explore avenues, including legislation, to eliminate the obligation to pay the taxes deferred pursuant to the implementation of this memorandum. So the big questions that we have, again, are going to be, you know, the deferment is supposed to be till when? And then two, what is this avenue that the Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, what is he going to be able to do, and what is the legislation going to be? And is this legislation, if it's going to have to be passed in Congress, are they going to get to a resolution when it comes to this? So those are some of the big question marks that I do have. There are specifics. The specifics are going to be that the individuals who are going to be able to qualify are going to be for individuals, any employee, that the amount of whose wages or compensation payable during any biweekly pay period is generally less than 4,000. So generally less than 4,000, why not just say 4,000? But we did the calculations already. $4,000, you multiply that by 26 because there's 26 pay periods. 4,000 times 26 is $104,000. So these are going to be the individuals that this payroll tax is going to be deferred to. So again, hopefully this is something that will help individuals who really need it. So what do you guys think? We went over two. Do we have time for another one? I'm looking at the time. 26 minutes. Why don't we go to number three while we're at it? So we talked about student loans, which I think is going to be helpful for a lot of people. We talked about the payroll tax, being able to defer it. So these are going to be the payroll taxes that are normally paid during the period of September 1st through December 31st. These are going to be deferred. Do we know till when? We don't know. It's going to be individuals who are making $104,000 or less. So we talked about that. The third one we'll take a look at is, let's look at this executive order on fighting the spread of COVID-19 by providing assistance to renters and homeowners. So before this, just a quick summary or recap. So before this with COVID, one of the things in the CARES Act was that essentially you can't evict anybody who is having problems with being able to pay their rent. And this was due to everything that was going on with the pandemic and the epidemic. So another question was going to be, what are we going to do when the memorandum was going to expire, which was August 31st, 2020. So the end of this month was going to be where the evictions could go back to what they were before, and what are we going to do for those individuals? So let's go read through this executive order and we'll discuss what this means specifically. So the executive order on fighting the spread of COVID-19 by providing assistance to renters and homeowners. By the authority vested in me, by the President as President, by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered as follows. That again, Section 1, the 2019 novel coronavirus pandemic, which originated from China, continues to pose a significant threat to the health of Americans throughout the United States. As we have since January 2020, with a proactive decision to limit travel from China and the passage of 3 massive economic relief packages, my administration will take whatever steps are necessary to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and maintain economic prosperity. The Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention, which is the CDC, and the Department of Health and Human Services have concluded that growing and disproportionate unemployment rates for some racial and ethnic minority groups during the COVID-19 pandemic may lead to greater risk of eviction and homelessness or sharing of housing. This trend is concerning for many reasons, including that homeless shelters have been proven to be particularly susceptible to outbreaks of COVID-19. CDC has observed that homelessness poses multiple challenges that can exacerbate and amplify the spread of COVID-19. Homeless shelters are often crowded, making social distancing difficult. Many persons experiencing homelessness are older or have underlying medical conditions, placing them at higher risk for severe COVID-19 associated illness. Increased shared housing is also potentially problematic to the extent that it results in increased in-person interactions between older, higher-risk individuals and their younger relatives or friends. My administration has taken bold steps to help renters and homeowners have safe and secure places to call home during COVID-19 crisis. Prior to the passage of the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which is the CARES Act, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development implemented a foreclosure and eviction moratorium for all single-family mortgages insured by the Federal Housing Administration. Furthermore, prior to the passage of the CARES Act, the Federal Housing Finance Agency announced that it had instructed the Federal National Mortgage Association and the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation to suspend foreclosure for at least 60 days. The FHFA has since announced that the enterprises will extend the foreclosure suspension until at least August 30th, 2020. The CARES Act imposed a temporary moratorium on evictions of certain renters, subject to certain conditions. The moratorium has now expired, and there is a significant risk that this will set off an abnormally large wave of evictions. With the failure of the Congress to act, my administration must do all that it can to help the vulnerable population stay in their homes in the midst of this pandemic. Those who are dislodged from their homes may be unable to shelter in place and may have more difficulty maintaining a routine of social distancing. They will have to find alternative living arrangements, which may include a homeless shelter or a crowded family home, and may require traveling to other states. In addition, evictions tend to disproportionately affect minorities, particularly African Americans and Latinos. Unlike the Congress, I cannot sit idly and refuse to assist vulnerable Americans in need. Under my administration, minorities achieve the lowest unemployment rates on record, and we will not let COVID-19 erase these gains by causing short-term dislocations that could well have long-term consequences. Accordingly, my administration, to the extent reasonably necessary to prevent the further spread of COVID-19, will take all lawful measures to prevent residential evictions and foreclosures resulting from financial hardships caused by COVID-19. All right, so long story short, that first section essentially is saying that due to COVID-19, the coronavirus, people get sick. People get sick due to coronavirus, then the coronavirus may spread. If you end up having to lose your house, you're going to have to find a place to stay. These places may be in shelters or with other families, which will increase the risk of the spread, which means that we may all have further issues with the COVID-19 illness. So that essentially is what he's trying to summarize in that, as the administration, as the president, he wants to do whatever he can to make sure that this is prevented. So that's summary of section 1. So let's get to the meat of it. What exactly are we going to do with this? So we're going to go over sections 2, sections 3, and hopefully that meat will give us more answers as far as what exactly is going to be done. So section 2 says that it is the policy of the United States to minimize to the greatest extent possible residential evictions and foreclosures during the ongoing COVID-19 national emergency. So pretty much says is that we, as the United States of America, the country is going to try to minimize any evictions and foreclosures. So that's very broad. What is the specific direction supposed to be then? Yes, that sounds all good. Yes, we want to try to decrease people from not having to leave their houses, finding other places because of COVID-19, but how is that going to work? So let's look at section 3. So section 3 is the response to public health risks of evictions and foreclosures. The Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Director of CDC shall consider whether any measures temporarily halting residential evictions of any tenants for failure to pay rent are reasonably necessary to prevent the further spread of COVID-19 from one state or possession to any other state or possession. B. The Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall identify any and all available federal funds to provide temporary financial assistance to renters and homeowners who, as a result of financial hardships caused by COVID-19, are struggling to meet their monthly rental or mortgage obligations. C. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall take action as appropriate and consistent with applicable law to promote the ability of renters and homeowners to avoid eviction or foreclosure resulting from financial hardships caused by COVID-19. Such actions may include encouraging and providing assistance to public housing authorities, affordable housing owners, landlords, and recipients of federal grant funds and minimizing evictions and foreclosures. And finally, Section D, or letter D. In consultation with the Secretary of State, the Director of the FHFA shall renew all existing authorities and resources that may be used to prevent evictions and foreclosures for renters and homeowners resulting from hardships caused by COVID-19. So, if we look at the previous act pretty much said, hey, you can't evict people during this time. That act is done. So now the president's pretty much saying, hey, we need to look at what can we do to as much as possible, try to decrease evictions and foreclosures. So, and this is based off of individuals who have issues with COVID-19. So the response is they shall consider. So I guess so it depends on which side you look at. If you are a person who is a rentee, or I'm sorry, a renter, and you're living somewhere, and all of a sudden this moratorium of being able to pay for the rent has gone away, can I be evicted now? It looks like they strongly recommend not to, but it's not really. It's saying that yes, I guess you kind of could, because they shall consider, but shall is not must. So it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, hey, you're good to go. You can stay. You can stick around a little bit more. I think a lot of this is going to be based off of the direction that the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Director of CDC. So there is still some risk that you may have to relocate if you're not able to have the funds. Question number two: if you are a owner and you're renting people, when you're looking at this, it's not really saying that you can't have people not stay at your place. So this is very tricky because, again, this is still very gray. This isn't really saying, hey, you can't do this and this is what's going to happen. So they try to add more meat. So the Secretary of the Treasury and the Secretary of Housing shall identify any and all available federal funds to provide temporary financial assistance to renters and homeowners who are struggling to meet their monthly rental or mortgage obligations. So what this sounds like to me is the way that we have individuals from not being evicted is going to be based off of the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of Urban Development are going to find monies, and these monies are going to be paid on the behalf of the renter so that they don't have to be evicted, is how I am interpreting Section 3B. So, homeowners, so this is almost like Section 8 housing is almost how I look at it, where before with Section 8, you have specific individuals who are in this program, and through this program, they are able to receive monies from the government. So is this almost like an extension so that now you have more people than in that Section 8 section can now apply to get these funds? So this will be something interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this is going to be described. And then you look at that Section C, where again it says that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall take action as appropriate and consistent with the law to promote the ability for renters and homeowners to avoid eviction or foreclosure resulting through hardships. And this is going to be done by encouraging, providing assistance to the public housing authorities, being able to help out the affordable housing owners, landlords, and the recipients of federal grant funds in minimizing evictions and foreclosures. So in addition to looking at the Treasury, then it's also going to be essentially HUD is going to be looking at doing that as well. And in consultation with the Secretary of Treasury, Director of the FHFA shall review all existing authorities and resources that may be used to prevent evictions. So long story short, it looks like the government is going to try to find some way to find monies to be able to provide to individuals who can't pay their rent, and this is how you're going to avoid being evicted. So again, a lot different from when you're watching the news and you're hearing the president, when he's signing these orders saying, hey, no evictions, hey, your federal loans, don't worry about them. We're taking care of you when it comes to that. And also taking a look at taxes. Hey, you don't have to pay payroll taxes. So again, how are these memorandums going to be enforced? We still have some questions on that. Finally, it is 40 minutes. Why not? Let's just do the fourth one because we're pretty much already there. So and this is probably the biggest one, is the $600 check that individuals on unemployment were receiving. What is going to be happening with that, and who's going to take care of that? So again, just to provide background, $600, was essentially being paid from the government to help with individuals who were on unemployment. And this was done as of April 18th. And this was something that was benefiting our individuals who had lost wages. And this was going on. And depending on how you look at it, some people felt that the $600 a week, for some Americans, they were making more money than what they normally were making. And that if you look at 600, you multiply that by 52, that equals to $31,000. So what some individuals were thinking is that the $600 a week was more than what people were making before. And because of this was not incentivizing individuals to be able to go and find work, because their work is going to be less than that. So if you divide that out by 2080, which is usually the amount of worked hours in a year, it amounts to $15 an hour. So this essentially, I believe, is, I think, more than, I'll look this up really quick. Let's see what the federal minimum wage is. So federal minimum wage currently is $10.80 per hour. And then you look at what's going on with unemployment being paid 15. Some would argue that, hey, I'm making more now than I was making when I was working, and why should I go back to work? The other argument is, look, I want to work. If I could work within my power, I would work, but I can't go to work because where I'm working isn't letting me back in. Or I essentially got fired and I can't find work in my area. I've tried to work, but I just can't find. So this is giving me a break. So, Congress was arguing both sides. 600 is too much. We need to do it less. But then the other side is, well, if you give me less, then I'm not going to be able to provide for my basic needs for my family. And I need to be able to provide to be able to go in. So I think President Trump is trying to somehow meet in the middle to try to take care of both of these things. So I'm going to read this. We'll talk more about it at the end. But this one is called the Memorandum on Authorizing the Other Needs Assistance Program for Major Disaster Declarations Related to Coronavirus Disease 2019. All right, so we're going to skip the first part that we always say. We're just going to go straight to this section in the policy. So Section 1, Policy. Protective measures enacted by states and localities across the country to prevent loss of life from COVID-19 have resulted in millions of Americans becoming unemployed and in need of assistance. My administration, recognizing the acute financial distress affecting families across the country, has worked to quickly provide billions of dollars in relief to supplement unemployment benefits and help businesses keep their workers employed, in addition to zeroing the federal student loan interest and delaying tax day. In total, nearly $3 trillion has been appropriated for emergency funding related to COVID-19. Because many of the relief programs created by the Congress have expired or will shortly expire, my administration and the Republican leadership in the United States Senate have proposed multiple options to continue to provide the needed relief to Americans. But the Democratic members of Congress have twice blocked temporary extensions of supplemental unemployment benefits. Political games that harm American lives are unacceptable, especially during a global pandemic, and I am taking action. All right, let's skip that part. All right, next part. CARES Act included $150 billion appropriated directly to the state, territorial, tribal, and some local governments to the Coronavirus Relief Fund to cover costs that were incurred during the COVID-19 emergency. As of the last report from the Treasury Inspector General regarding state expenditures, more than $80 billion of the CRF remain available to supplement billions of dollars states have received in other federal assistance. In addition, the Department of Homeland Security's Disaster Relief Fund has more than $70 billion in emergency assistance funding available. I am hereby directing the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is FEMA, to assist in providing benefits from the DRF, and I'm calling upon states to use their CRF allocation to bring to continued financial relief to Americans who are suffering from unemployment due to the COVID-19 outbreak. All right, so long story short, CARES Act pretty much is done when it comes to providing, the $600 per week. President says, hey, we want to do something about it. So with the monies that we have left, he wants to make sure that there's a partnership between the states and the federal government to be able to give monies to people. All right, let's look at how specifically he wants this to be done. So Section 2 is going to be providing disaster relief funds. On March 13, 2020, I declared that a national emergency recognized by the threat proposed by COVID-19. I also determined that the same day the COVID-19 outbreak constituted an emergency of nationwide scope pursuant to the Stafford Act. All states have enacted their emergency operations centers and are working to fight the spread of the virus. As of April 18, 2020, I've declared that a major disaster exists in all states and territories as a result of the virus and have authorized the emergency protective measures to provide financial assistance for the needs of those who have lost their unemployment as a result of the pandemic. I am directing up to $44 billion from the DRF at the statutorily mandated 75% federal cost share be made available for lost wages and assistance to eligible claimants. At least $25 billion of the total DRF balances will be set aside to support ongoing disaster relief and recovery funds and potential 2020 disaster costs. So pretty much what he's saying is that he's essentially giving close to, I guess specifically $44 billion to be able to help with 75% of the help for employees or for individuals who have lost their job due to a financial hardship during the COVID-19 times. So that's one point, is he wants it to be 75% coming from the federal. Section 3, there's going to be a state allocation piece. So I am calling on states to use the amounts allocated to them out of the CRF or other state funding to provide temporary enhanced financial support to those whose jobs or wages have been adversely affected by COVID-19. These funds, including those currently used to support the state unemployment insurance programs, may be applied to the state's cost share with the federal DRF funds to ensure that those affected by a loss in wages due to COVID-19 continue to receive supplemental benefits for weeks of unemployment ending no later than December 27, 2020. States should also identify funds to be spent without a federal match should the total DRF balance deplete the $25 billion. Essentially what he's saying here is, hey, this is what we've got as a federal government. We are going to give certain monies to the states, but once this money runs out, we want to make sure that states are still able to continue to give money to the individuals who need the money. Section 4. This is another important one that we've got to talk about. So Section 4 is the assistance program for lost wages. For purposes of the memorandum, state essentially is going to be all of our states, and governor is going to be the person who's responsible for the state. So Section B says, to help meet the needs of the American people during this unprecedented and continuously evolving public health crisis, the Secretary of Homeland Security, acting through FEMA administrator, is authorized to make available other needs assistance for lost wages. So essentially, he's pretty much saying that this is a national disaster, so FEMA is able to give funds based off of the needs that are needed by the country. So these are the steps that needs to be done. So 1, the governor requests from FEMA a grant for lost wages. 2, the governor administers delivery of financial assistance for lost wages in conjunction with the state's unemployment insurance system. So you qualify the states, then you're able to get some from the state and you get some from the government. C, in exercising this authority, the Secretary acting through FEMA administrator shall, subject to the limitations above, approve a lost wages assistance program that authorizes the governor to provide a $400 payment per week, which shall reflect a $300 federal contribution to eligible claimants from the week of unemployment ending August 1st, 2020. All right, so that was a big one. So the way that this is going to be figured out by reading this is individuals will be able to receive funds through the lost wages program. The amount is going to be $400. This is going to be done from the state level. This is what it looks like, not the federal level. So the states are receiving a contribution from the government, which is $300, and they have to be able to provide a $400 per week, which means the other $100, where does it come from? It comes from the states. For the purposes of this memorandum, the term eligible claimants means claimants who, one, receive for the week lost wages assistance is thought at least $100 per week from any of the following benefits. So this is going to be unemployment, essentially unemployment, pandemic emergency unemployment, so extended benefits, short time compensation. So essentially it's being able to receive monies and assistance from the state or government somehow. And then Section 5 says, for additional assistance, the Secretary of Labor shall provide as appropriate and consistent with applicable law, technical assistance from FEMA in implementation of lost wages. And then it looks like Section 6 essentially says that this program is going to end. It says lost wages assistance program described in Section 4B of the memorandum shall be available for eligible claimants until the balance of the DRF reaches